Awesome. So it's really nice to be here with you all today. My name is Becca Litwin. I work on the partnerships team with my colleague Jill at an organization called Democracy Works. I'm also a licensed social worker in New York State and a big fan of the work that Vot-ER is doing alongside practitioners to get folks registered and voting.
Yes, and I'm Jill Brownfield. I'm joining Becca from Democracy Works as well today.
Awesome. So who are we? Democracy Works is a nonpartisan, nonprofit organization that works to simplify, modernize, and increase accessibility around this country's voting process, from local to federal, through the building of tools and technology. I know yesterday it was Social Work Takeover Day, but I'm really proud to be wearing my social work hat, my role at Democracy Works. And for any social workers on the line, I'm excited to share that our voter engagement efforts at Democracy Works strongly align with our profession's core values, from addressing social problems through innovative means to challenging social injustice through empowering voters to participate in our democracy. And in a year like 2020, our mission is even more urgent, with the election landscape rapidly changing every day. So we've partnered with the Vot-ER folks through Turbovote, an online tool that powers all of Vot-ER's waiting room kiosks. And it's also where patients get directed via the QR code that's found on the Healthy Democracy Kit lanyards. So what does Turbovote do exactly? It's an online tool that can help people in all 50 states and DC to vote, request an absentee ballot, sign up for election reminders at the federal, state, and local levels. Turbovote helps to lower process barriers for all eligible voters and ensure that the voice of our electorate is powerful and heard and moving toward a more fully enfranchised reality for everyone. So through Turbovote, you can do three main things. The first is receive voter registration assistance in all 50 states plus DC. So in the 39 states that offer online voter registration, Turbovote will direct you to your state's site and explain the process for using it. And if you're unable to register online or simply prefer to use a paper form, Turbovote will also help you do that. And then in states without the online options, Turbovote just helps you register to vote with the paper form. We'll generate a PDF of the form you need, pre-filled with the information you provide us. All you have to do is print it and sign it and fill in your ID number, and then mail it to the address that we provide you. So the second big thing is that you can get assistance with voting by mail or requesting an absentee ballot. So for voting absentee, the process is similar. Turbovote collects each state's requirements for allowing residents to vote by mail or vote absentee. We provide the to request an absentee ballot where possible. And we're monitoring changes every day regarding election rules and regulations through the pandemic and are notifying users as those changes arise. And then the last big thing that Turbovote does is provide election reminders for local, state, and federal elections via SMS and email. So our research team is keeping track of elections happening all across the country. And our notifications are really awesome and robust. And I'll talk a little bit more about those when we do a sample sign up in a bit. But I also quickly want to underscore what Turbovote can't do. So Turbovote cannot take the place of local and state election officials. So we can't directly register someone to vote. Only an election official can process voter registration. And then Turbovote also can't send you ballots. Only election officials can mail ballots. And I think just, I wanted to underscore that here as important messaging for folks who are getting the Vot-ER Turbovote link out to the world to make sure that there's no confusion about what signing up for Turbovote means. So before we pass the mic over to our friends at VoteRiders, I briefly wanted to just walk through a sample Turbovote sign up on the Vot-ER page so you can all get a feel for what that process looks like for patients and clients, or for whomever happens upon a Vot-ER kiosk or a clinician who's wearing a Healthy Democracy Kit lanyard. So I'm going to walk through a sample sign up from the perspective of a Vot-ER or Healthy Democracy Kit code user. Oh, thanks, Jill. Cool. So I'm going to do a sample sign up for user in Michigan, which is one of the 39 states that offers online voter registration. And there's also a sizable population of Vot-ER folks there. So the first thing I want to call attention to is the unique Turbovote link, which is voter.turbovote.org. You can sign up for Turbovote in English or Spanish. You just need to click the button below the Get Started. Jill, would you mind toggling? Yeah, cool. So you can do the whole flow in English or Spanish. You can also receive election notifications in either language. And then additionally, our help desk provides support in both English and Spanish. And our help desk is staffed by real humans at Democracy Works who are experts in what they do and a really, really, really incredible resource. So if a user has questions as they're moving through this process, recommend that they reach out to our help desk or about voting in general. They're just very knowledgeable. Okay, so let's click Get Started. Cool. So first, Turbovote's going to ask the user's name as it appears on their state-issued ID. We want to capture the user's legal name so that we have any official election paperwork be part of that sign-up. Turbovote will also ask for the user's nickname so they can be called whatever they want in our notifications. So when we're reaching out, like when Turbovote reaches out to users with upcoming elections, we're addressing them with the name they prefer. So Jill's full name is Jillian, but wants to be called Jill in her election notifications. Great. So next, we're going to capture the user's preferred communication preferences, which marks the first of Turbovote's 3 main services that I talked about earlier, election reminders. Users can receive election reminders by text, email, or both. A user will receive a welcome notification upon signing up, a notification approximately 30 days prior to any election they're eligible to vote in, again, local to federal, and then finally, a notification the day before an election, which would also include information like your polling place. We've also added a check your registration status notification for any user who goes through the Turbovote flow and requests registration assistance. And that comes about 10 to 14 days after their initial sign up, which is a really awesome way just to make sure that the user has carried out the process with fidelity and just feels confident that they're ready to vote come voting day. And then the last thing I'll say here is that a great feature about these notifications is that you can respond to any of the notification text or email, and that puts you in contact with our help desk. So that's pretty cool too. Let's continue. Okay, so the next question is, are you registered to vote? And this is where the Turbovote sign-up process branches depending on who you are and what your story is. So since the goal of Vot-ER's work is voter reg, let's walk through the user flow today for the no, I'm not sure together. So once a user indicates that they'd like Turbovote's help registering to vote, the next question is, where do you want to register to vote? And I pulled a Michigan address for today. Oh, you're so good, Jill. Thank you. Okay. So once you can't also just flagging, you can't put a PO box here. So now the process is customized by state. And since I've provided Turbovote with an address in Michigan, it knows that Michigan offers online voter registration. So this screen wouldn't appear in states that don't have online voter registration. And we would just launch them into the paper form user flow. But in states that do have online voter registration, Turbovote lets the user know what kind of ID that may be required to register online in that state. So you can see here that you need a Michigan driver's license or state ID to use Michigan's online voter registration system. But if you don't have that, you can always register with paper. If you did want to register online, you could click the I'll register online button, and it pops out to your state's site where you can go through that process. And then after you go through that process, you come back to Turbovote, you say, yes, I finished the process. That feels great. Let's do that for right now. And then, okay, so now we're back and Turbovote is gonna be asking you a few more questions that are gonna help us make sure that we're sending you appropriate notifications. And so we ask about party, helps us surface open and closed primary rules to users according to their state. Again, this text is going to be different depending on the address the user provided Turbovote, as primary rules vary by state, as everything does in our elections. And in states like Michigan that have options to vote by mail or at the polls, Turbovote will ask me my preference and then send notifications relevant to my preferences. I will note that given the pandemic in 2020, we are serving all users information about voting by mail in their notifications regardless, just to make sure that everyone has all the information they need to make decisions about how they want to be voting. And then if I have an upcoming election, I'll also see that information. Turbovote usually has elections loaded into our database about 30 to 45 days beforehand, with the exception of federal general elections, which often have a longer runway. So now you see that we're on Turbovote's almost done page. It's actually our done page, but we want to make sure that the user is super clear that there's still some things that need to happen to make sure that they're fully registered. So you can see a link to Michigan's online voter registration portal in case I need to return there. As well, if there is a deadline reminder upcoming, that would be there as well. And then if for whatever reason I wasn't able to successfully register, Turbovote reminds me that I can always use a paper form and shares information about that process. And then it'll also, tell me to check my, confirm my voter registration about 10 to 14 days. Also notification from Turbovote to remind me to do that, to make sure that I did everything. And then the final box is just let the user know when they're going to hear from us again, and uplifts our help desk again, which I talked about earlier. And that's really it. I want to just name that, like, this is one example. There's lots of ways that the Turbovote flow happens depending on who you are and what your experience is. But I really suggest that all interested folks sign up for Turbovote, both as a way to get a feel for the tool if you're considering partnering with Vot-ER, but also just as an awesome way to get election reminders and voter information. You can also visit, we have a really cool website called howto.vote for state-by-state need-to-knows on both getting registered and casting your ballot. Thanks, Jill. And I'll drop both of these links into the chat now so that you can check them out on your own. To all attendees. So that's it. I will pause. I just went through a lot of information very quickly, and see if there are any questions before we pass it over to VoteRiders.
For some reason, I am not seeing an option to stop sharing my screen. So if someone could help me from Civic Health Month. Oh, thank you.
All right, it doesn't look, oops, sorry.
Oh no, I was just gonna say, yeah, we're good.
Yeah.
I'm happy to share also, so I'll do that right now in the chat. If folks have questions later.
Yeah, if you guys have questions later, you can also drop them in the Q&A box. And we will also have time at the end for questions. So VoteRiders, over to you guys.
Hey y'all, Anita will be sharing the presentation in a second here. So while she's pulling up the presentation, just to give you all a little bit of background. Hi all, my name is Selene Gomez. I am the National Outreach Director for VoteRiders. And so, for us, we have been around since 2012, and we focus on voter ID. We saw that there's a lot of great organizations out there that are doing good work on the ground, doing voter registration, getting out the vote, doing voter education. But we saw that there was that component, that link that we wanted to contribute to be able to fully provide all the resources possible to a voter, because we know that a lot of the work that is done on the ground oftentimes is with first-time voters or voters who have unfortunately been disenfranchised by one way or another. And so, for us, we really wanted to kind of bring that component into the conversation. and doing it in a way to where we're not adding work to the organizations, especially with nonprofits, people can be saturated. We need something really quick. And so we decided, that was kind of the thing that we were going to focus on. We are a national organization and we are nonpartisan, and I do want to emphasize the nonpartisan part. We do not ask anybody how they're going to vote, whether it's for, people running or even just, proposals or amendments, whatever may be on the ballot. So I do want to emphasize that. And we focus on practical ways of helping an individual. Of course, we are going to talk a little bit about how it is that we've helped individuals in the past. It's not to say that we may be doing it now because of this pandemic. I think it's really shaken things up with everybody, and we've definitely had to find different avenues as to how to do that. And so, great, we have the screen up here. Anita, so if you can go to the
okay, you can see it? Yes. Okay.
Yes, we can see it. So if
Thank
you
you.
can the next one, you can skip the slide with my picture on it. They know who I am. Thank you. And if you can go to the next one as well. And so for us, we know, like I said, we wanted to work with this component because we also knew that there's over 25 million individuals who are eligible to vote that do not have a current government issued ID. And this creates a problem, right? Because voter ID laws are on a state-by-state basis, it really varies depending on the state, which is, another thing that people may be confused about. If you go to the next slide, Anita, please. We actually have a map here that is color-coded. The cream-colored states do not have voter ID laws. And then the blue ones, they do have a voter ID law, and the red ones have a strict voter ID law. What's the difference? The difference between a voter ID law for us and a strict voter ID law is the fact that in the red states, there's just no way around it. You do need to have an identification to be able to vote to cast a regular ballot. But in other states, like in Texas, for example, you can sign a declaration of impediment and show a secondary document, and you'll be able to still cast a regular ballot. So please look at your respective states and see, do you all have a voter ID law? And even if you don't, something that we found, unfortunately, is that we get through our helpline, which Anita will talk to us a little bit more about, we actually get calls because sometimes voters think that a voter ID law is a federal law, or they think that their state has a voter ID law because they've heard so much about it when they in fact don't. And oftentimes it's just voter confusion. A lot of the times people actually do have an ID that's accepted in their state, but because it's so intimidating and it's so confusing and they may not be able to know where to get the information, sometimes they just don't go to the polls altogether, which is another restriction that is added to voters. And unfortunately, it's another obstacle or another impediment that individuals have. So, and of course, that figure that I gave of over the 25 million eligible voters, it's nationwide. And so we know that there is a lot of work. We do have 35 out of the 50 states that have some form of ID law. And so even though we are national, we work with all the states, the states with the ID laws are our focus. And that is where we focus our resources to make sure that voters are being informed, especially when you're talking about states like Kentucky that just passed their voter ID law and decided to implement it on these general elections. You're talking about them having, under 80 days to be able to let every voter know that they're actually going to need a form of identification. So please look at the map and see where you reside, and hopefully you can keep that in mind for the rest of the presentation with the tools and services that we are going to offer. So if you can go to the next slide, Anita. Thank you. And studies have shown the people that are most impacted by this tend to be communities of color and relatively younger voters, especially college students, since they're a little bit more mobile, right? So maybe keeping their identification or driver's license up to date is not necessarily the priority that they have. I know that it wasn't for me when I was in college. So that they are a population that is affected a little bit more. And then also older individuals, 65 and over, especially we associate having a government issued ID with a driver's license automatically, right? So if you decide, hey, I'm not going to be driving anymore, or whatever it may be, you just tend to let it expire. And so, individuals may not have a current ID, although there are some states where they will accept expired identification, especially for people that are 65 or 70 years and older. And then individuals, when it comes to gender, women tend to be, a little more affected by this, especially, after getting married, changing your last name, whatever it may be, having to do that extra step, going and showing, the marriage certificate and making that change is definitely necessary, because sometimes we may forget about it. And then once it gets closer to elections, we realize that that's what we need to do. So next slide. So here are some highlights that we want to emphasize. Voter ID confusion is in every state. Like I mentioned, even in states that don't have voter ID laws, we find that we receive calls on our helpline asking about this. And the rules are different in every state because every state passes their own ID law. There are some states where they may, just to give you an idea, right? There are some states that don't accept student IDs, other states that will accept any student ID, and then there's other states that will only accept student IDs from a list that they've provided. And sometimes it includes high school, sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes it includes trade schools, sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes it's just public universities and not necessarily private. So we really have to be very conscious of the fact that it is very confusing, and for somebody who is having 100 things going on at once, for example, right now, college students are trying to figure out, okay, how is my semester going to look, with the distance learning and virtual learning. And then on top of that, knowing if they could vote, where they're registered in school or not. They also have to know, one, if their state has a voter ID law, and two, if they will accept that form of identification or if they have to show another identification. Of course, because things aren't confusing enough, rules are also different for voting in person or voting by mail. This is very important to highlight when you're talking to somebody who is being introduced to voting for the first time, because there are some states where, even if you just registered, you can go ahead and vote no problem by mail. There's others that you actually need to provide more you need to provide more documents, such as identification. So there are some states that if it's your first time voting and you're voting by mail, you either have to provide a hard copy of your identification along with your mail-in ballot request, or you have to go to your county clerk's office and show them an identification, like in Tennessee, in person. So technically there isn't a full mechanism for somebody in Tennessee to fully vote by mail or do the distance thing if it's your first time voting. And then rules are also constantly changing nonstop. We're seeing that there's several states that are expanding early voting, and they're making voting by mail more accessible. So we also have to keep in mind, like, if it is a state that initially asked you for a copy of your identification, are they going to circumvent that to where you don't have to in this election? So it's very important to stay up to date. And with poll worker confusion, there's inconsistent, enforcement, and there is limited training on poll workers. So for us, we really want to ensure that people are confident that they have the proper identification when they go to the polls, because then they know that they can't be sent back or turned away. And so for us, that is definitely one of the goals for the voters, especially first-time voters, because we know that they need to have a good, positive first experience in order for them to come back, because if not, the likelihood of them coming back is not very high. And then to add to everything, we know that we had the rollout of the Real IDs. We did have the Real ID deadline for October 1st of 2020. And even before this, pandemic happened, we were already getting calls of people thinking that they needed a real ID to go vote. The answer is no. You do not need a real ID to go vote. You will need it to fly domestically and for other things, but to vote, you can just have your regular ID. Also, the real ID deadline has been pushed back a year to October of 2021. So, you know, as you can see, I've discussed so many different intricate parts to the voter ID laws that I haven't even begun to necessarily cover all of them because they vary state by state. But we do have some tools and services that Anita will be talking to you all about that we hope you can share with your patients to be able to make this process a little bit less confusing and encourage individuals to participate in our democratic process. So without further ado, for us, we know that it becomes more complicated to vote, and it is definitely a form of disenfranchisement. People may be discouraged to go to the polls, because there is that confusion. But I do want to pass it over now to Anita to talk to you a little bit more about what is it that VoteRiders, with your help, can do to overcome that.
Hi, my name is Anita Johnson. I am the Wisconsin Voter ID Coalition Coordinator, and I will be talking about some of the things that VoteRiders does to make it easier for a voter to get an ID so they can register to vote and then go to the polls to vote. The first thing that I will talk about is voter assistance. Obtaining ID costs money and can take a lot of time. VoteRiders helps voters to track down key documents and secure the ID that they need to cast a ballot. The first time voter is often intimidated when they go to the DMV because they don't know what documents they need in order to get a state ID. And a lot of times they don't have a birth certificate. We do advise them on how to obtain a birth certificate so they can at least get a temporary, in Milwaukee, you can get a temporary ID so that you can vote on election day. So we do cover the cost of vital documents. We also arrange transportation to the DMV. We will pick up the voter from their home, take them to the DMV, and make sure they get back to their home. Just a couple of weeks ago, I had to order a Lyft twice in 4 hours for a voter because once we left the DMV called the voter and said, well, now we need this, 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 and this. And the voter had to go back to the DMV. So we arranged another Lyft to come and pick him up and take him to the DMV. And we also provide pro bono legal assistance. Thank God I haven't had to use that yet, but I have worked on some cases for as long as 6 months. So we follow up because our intent is to make sure that everyone has an ID so they can go to the polls to vote. We also have the voter ID information cards. I love these cards because they're laminated and they fit right in your wallet and you don't have to worry about tearing them up. But in Wisconsin, on the back of the voter ID information card, it tells you everything you need when you go to the polls to vote. So if people are not sure about what they need when they go to the polls, they can just refer to the back of the Wisconsin ID card. We also put our telephone number there, and it is a 414 number that will come directly to me through email. And I read the email, and normally I try to answer that person within 24 hours. We have the voter ID card in English and in Spanish. You can you can order this voter ID card by downloading it and printing it at VoteRiders.org, or nonprofit organizations can order for free. My partners in Wisconsin tell me how many cards that they need. I order the cards for them and have the cards sent directly to their businesses, so it's convenient for them to have. But these cards are really good to have in your offices, sitting on the counters, so people can pick them up and read them and know that this is what I need when I go to the polls to vote. Or if they have any other questions, they can call the number for 844-338-8743. And then there is a person there that will direct the call to the correct state. If a person is having any problems getting a photo ID, or they don't know what they need when they go to the polls to vote. We are very proud of our voter ID chat box. This chat box offers fast and accurate information about voter ID requirements in English and in Spanish. Anyone in need of assistance or advice is connected with personalized support. If a person wants to volunteer, they can call our text helpline 844-338-8743 and let people know, I want to volunteer. If you want to donate money, you can also call, and then we will take you through the procedures that you need to know so you can donate to VoteRiders. We also have Facebook Messenger, and we also have our website chat on VoteRiders.org. Voter ID for absentee ballots or vote by mail is very confusing, and it's very confusing in Wisconsin, so I know it's confusing in other states. You want to make sure everyone, not just the first-time voter, but anyone that needs an absentee ballot, make sure you are a registered voter before requesting an absentee ballot. In our business, we find that a lot of people don't have a smartphone. They don't have a laptop. And in order to request an absentee ballot in Wisconsin, a copy of your photo ID must be on that application. So people don't have the tools to do this. VoteRiders will assist you in putting that picture on the application. So what the voter needs to do is email a copy of their ID to the VoteRiders email address. We then make a copy of the ID on the absentee ballot application and a stamped envelope addressed to the office that will process the ballot request. We make sure that that picture is on the application and mailed to the, and the envelope and mailed to the office that processed that ballot request. So if the voter doesn't have tools to put their picture onto the absentee request, they will send a copy of their ID to the VoteRiders address, and we will put that picture onto the request and then mail it to the office that processes the ballot request.